Ben Bernanke was chair of the Federal Reserve from 2006 until 2014. As most people know, the Federal Reserve Bank is the private bank that makes important policy decisions about the economy in the divided states of America. It is the most powerful economic institution in the U.S., and probably in the world. Its core responsibilities include, for example, setting interest rates, managing the money supply, and regulating financial markets. In sharp contrast to the tasks currently assigned to the Federal Reserve System, many people believe the Constitution of the United States mandates that currency be printed only by the federal government. In fact, U.S. President John F. Kennedy was assassinated less than 6 months after he signed Executive Order 11110 on June 5, 1963. This executive order restored the right of the American people to print their own money. Specifically, it mandated the U.S. Treasury print the currency used in this country. Some say the Treasury Department was printing currency when Kennedy was killed, although I suspect we will never know all the facts about who was doing what more than 60 years ago. 5 decades before Kennedy signed Executive Order 11110, the Federal Reserve Bank was created during the Woodrow Wilson administration in the United States. This private bank was established on December 23, 1913. The idea for the bank was hatched by 6 men in late November 1910, about 3 years before Wilson signed the legislation allowing for its creation. Nelson Aldrich, A. Piatt Andrew, Henry Davison, Arthur Shelton, Frank Vanderlip, and Paul Warburg thus became among the most important people in history, and yet almost nobody knows their names. These 6 men met on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia in the southern United States. If you have time to investigate the creation and maintenance of the Federal Reserve System, I encourage you to do so. For example, there is little doubt that the Constitution of the United States does not grant the federal government the right to create a central banking system, much less a private one. Let's return to Ben Bernanke and his 2 terms as chair of the Federal Reserve System. During his tenure, he admitted that nearly every bank in the country almost failed. This was shortly after the price of oil peaked at $147.27 per barrel in mid-2008. The story about banks on the brink of failure, published on January 28, 2011, has been critically underreported during the last 13 years. Also, Bernanke failed to mention that such an outcome almost certainly would have terminated industrial civilization, shortly after the demise of any one of the several banks deemed too big to fail. Anyone with even the slightest understanding of the aerosol masking effect knows better than to believe that slowing or stopping industrial activity is a good idea. This factor alone could contribute significantly to the near-term loss of all life on Earth, resulting from a 5 to 6 C global average rise in temperature over the course of the next few years, much less over the course of the next few centuries. Tack on myriad other factors certain to follow, such as the additional release of methane and carbon dioxide into an atmosphere already saturated with methane and carbon dioxide, and the future looks bleak. Never mind the importance of the rate of environmental change, which is already occurring too quickly for most of our closest cousins to keep up. With respect to our knowledge of the industrial economy and abrupt climate change, I suspect most of us are still catching up to the people pulling the strings of empire, as I indicated in a peer-reviewed article published in September 2019. For a relatively recent overview of the economic situation, we can turn to an article published by The Issue on December 7, 2023. This article, titled The Final Stages of American Collapse, opens with this lead, quote, "An historic disaster is now unfolding in America," end quote. The first paragraph goes on to include the following lines, quote, "That might make you chuckle. After all, there have been plenty of those, but this time's different. From here, it appears that America is poised to enter the final stage of collapse. No going back, irreversible, game over level," end quote. And then, because some people might not understand the dire implications of economic collapse, the article continues, quote, "What do I mean by that? Just as I predicted, and we've been discussing, considering the following, which should make you shudder," end quote. What follows comes from the New York Times with the title, "This is Grim," one Democratic pollster says. The grim part follows, quote, "Democracy Corps a Democratic advisory group founded by Stan Greenberg and James Carville, surveyed 2,500 voters in presidential and Senate battleground states, as well as competitive House districts. In an email, Greenberg summarized the results. "This is grim." The study, Greenberg said, found that collectively, voters in the Democratic base of blacks, Hispanics, Asians, LGBTQ+ community, Gen Z, millennials, unmarried, and college women give Trump higher approval ratings than Biden. I'll read a few more lines from the article at The Issue. The article is linked at the NatureBat's Last Substack account, and I encourage you to read the entire article. Quote, "The economy? It's going to go south incredibly fast. This would trigger a global financial crisis." End quote. Quote, "But that's barely the beginning. Prices are surging now because of climate change. For example, India stopped exporting grains last summer. Now imagine a world where the fight against climate change is a memory. Good luck with any sort of vaguely not implosive economy in that world." End quote. Finally, from the final paragraphs, quote, "It's hard to say just why something so surreal could even happen in the end. Why would young people, the LGBTQ, minorities, vote for fascism? Why would you set fire to your own house? Why would you choose your own subjugation? Take your own rights and freedoms away? Give the worst sorts power over you, which they're sure to abuse because they openly plan it already? All we can say, really, is that when we see such things happen, a nation is at the glittering precipice of the final stages of collapse. This, my friends, is what ruin really is." End quote. Again, I'll mention the aerosol masking effect, which indicates that slowing or stopping industrial activity is a terrible idea. This factor alone could contribute significantly to the near-term loss of all life on Earth that is virtually certain to result from 5 to 6 C global average rise in temperature over the course of the next few years, much less over the next few centuries. Add the additional release of methane and carbon dioxide into an atmosphere already saturated with greenhouse gases, and the future looks bleak. All this is happening in a world in which the rate of environmental change is already occurring too quickly for most of our closest cousins to keep up. At the root of our shared predicament lies the concept of ownership, as I mentioned previously, in this space and also at GuyMcPherson.com. I used to believe that this concept would diminish greatly in importance as more important events begin to unfold. I was thinking about events such as massive hurricanes, major rivers drying up, the loss of habitat for humans and other animals, and a mega drought or two leading to the inability to grow grains at scale. Alas, I was clearly incorrect about the impending decline of the importance of ownership. Ownership still ranks among the most important factors in the lives of most people. The idea that winning is connected to people who die with the most toys still dominates this culture. Apparently, this insane notion will persist until the last person dies, with all the money, cryptocurrency, and precious metals in the world. This is winning? Not to me. Whereas I agree that access to fiat currency and the many attendant privileges is considerably more fun than not having money, I would gladly trade all the money in the world for the retention of life on the only planet known with certainties to support life. It's a quirky idea, I know. Still, life that begets life is better than a lifeless rock floating through space.